Data activity, database comparison. Setting up and configuring a database comparison using data activities. So this video will show you how to use a data activity to snapshot a database, in this case a little Oracle database, where we're testing. Once we've completed the testing, we can then compare the data before we started testing and after the testing is finished. So first things first, let's create a data activity. In this case, we're calling it compare database OT. Let's click inside and have a look. Now, what you have with data activities is basically components which you add into the activity. We can attach definition version. You could attach a submit form, for example, or you could attach an existing compare configuration list. Also, we have some specific actions in that we might want to create a form that the user could use to submit the compare. And we could also create a form to snapshot the database. First things first, we need to tell it which database we're working with. Now, we've already registered this as a definition, and we pick up a specific database version. That's important. Now, what you'll see is the component now has a data definition attached to it, which is shown here. Now, what you'll see is a drop down. There's a couple of things we can do here. We could go and have a look at it, but the main option here is we need to build a compare configuration list. So we're going to execute that. It'll ask which server you want to run this on. In this case, it's my machine. Let's execute this. Now, what will happen now is it knows all the tables that are in the definition, and you can choose the ones you need to work with. In this case, I'm just going to snapshot the entire database. So I now click execute, and that will fire off the batch process. So that's finished. Now, if we click back, we've now gone back to the data activity, and you can see it's attached a component, which in this case is the list, which is data list, data activity, compare, config, compare database OT. Now, again, in the drop down here, you'll see modify compare configuration list. I can go and have a quick look at it. Now, the list contains all the information for the compare process to work. Now, you'll see it's got all the table names, obviously, the primary keys, which is how you identify if something has been added or deleted. It's also got two select clauses which are going to be issued against the source and target. Now, you'll see here that we've got _snap. Now, what we're doing here is we're going to create another version of the table using database snapshots to compare against. Now, if we go back to the activity, you'll see in here that you can also define what that's going to be called. In this case, it was _snap, and when we submitted the action to build a compare configuration list, it picked it up directly from what you've entered here. If you're going cross database, then you wouldn't actually be using database snapshots, so in this case, you could set that to blank. Now, if you scroll down a bit, you'll see an activity audit, and what this is showing is all of the actions that have been performed for this data activity in descending time order. Now, you'll see this is the job that we ran before. You can click on it and have a look at the job and look at the details in there. But you can also see it's downloaded some attachments. Now, let's have a quick look at those attachments. Now, what you'll see here is that we've actually built the SQL that you want to issue to snapshot the database. Now, there are a number of different variations and different ways to do that, and there are 5 different files that you can download. Now, what you're going to do is you're actually going to create a file called OT reset snapshot.sql, and we're going to move that to the server. Now, this is what we're going to use in a form that the user can execute to snapshot the database. So now we're going to create a couple of forms. Now, the idea is the forms are going to be used by a normal user to basically create a snapshot and then to compare the database. They wouldn't normally come into the data activity to run it. So let's create both of those forms. So this is the snapshot form, so snapshot OT database. Now, I'm pointing it at the SQL that's going to be run to snapshot it. Click on execute, and that's going to create the form. Now, that's finished. We go back to the activity. What you'll now see is that there's an actual form associated with it. Now, we could execute it to test it, but we're going to modify it first. So let's just go in and modify it. Now, here we have all of the standard parameters for the snapshot. Now, what we do need to do is to tell it which database that we're going to be running it against. Now, in this case, I'm not going to allow the user to choose the database because this is a specific form set up for them to compare this OT database. So I click on save. Let's go back to the activity now. And I'm actually going to do a snapshot and make sure it works. So I'm just going to click on execute. I'm going to run the database snapshot. Now, what will happen now is the form will pop up. We created no parameters for them to fill in. You could obviously change that if you wanted to, if you had multiple databases you wish the user to play around with. Click on execute, and this will now snapshot the database for us. So that's finished. Now again, if we go to our activity audit, you'll see ran script OT reset snapshot.sql. It's going to have a look at the job, and it's showing us the SQL statements that were run. It will also show you a little audit report as well to make sure that everything worked correctly. Now we need to create another form, the second form, which is the actual compare. So we're going to create a submit form. You fill in the name of it, click on execute, and just like the other one, it's going to create a different submit form. And this one will allow the user to submit the compare. That's finished. Now let's go back to the activity. Again, you'll see another form has been attached. Now again, we're going to modify it. Now there are lots of parameters that you can set for the database comparison, but in this particular case, again, we're not really going to bother the user with all the variations of the different types of parameters. We're just going to choose our Oracle OT database. We're going to save it. Now I could execute the job from inside the data activity, but in this case, what I'm going to do is come in where our user requests jobs. We're going to go to the task group compare, and you'll see compare Oracle OT database. Click on execute, and this is going to fire off the database comparison. That's finished, and the user would now have a little spreadsheet which shows them the differences in the database that have occurred when we ran the update telephone number process. If you go back to the activity itself and you look at the audit, you can see also the job number has been associated with it, and you can also download that attachment from there. So you can either work inside the activity, or you can ask the user to submit the jobs through the submission screen. As users start running comparisons, you'll see what this particular data activity has been up to, so you'll see an audit. If you do need to make any changes, all you need to do is to come back in and maybe modify your configuration list, and all of the other jobs will pick that up directly. So the data activity for compare is now grouped into one process where you can maintain and understand all of the different components, as well as the history of what's happened building up this particular data activity.